Hi, it's Dr. Greg Jantz as a counselor and founder also of the Center of Place of Hope and celebrating 40 years. My goodness. I want to talk about my latest book, by the way, is Triumph Over Trauma. I've authored 45 different titles, and it's all based out of our work here at the Center of Place of Hope. And I just made a few notes about trauma and abandonment issues, and I want to say abandonment issues are delicate, difficult, challenging, and exceedingly painful. Let me just say that. When a person feels abandonment, and let me just say whether it's childhood or adulthood, a sense of abandonment really strikes at the core of our being. I want to give you my definition. Abandonment trauma arises when we feel deserted, rejected, or neglected by somebody significant. It affects our security and trust in our relationships. So a sense of being neglected, rejected, deserted, and it's painful. Let me just go over some quick forms of abandonment that I made my notes. Physical abandonment, parents leave, growing up, they're gone. Loved ones disappear. So some form of parental loss or a separation. Now, there's also emotional abandonment, where they're just really not there. And the caregiver or loved one is simply emotionally not available. This could be due to addiction or multiple issues, but they're just not available. All right, what's the long-term effects of abandonment? Shame and guilt, number one. When we internalize abandonment, we end up oftentimes feeling like this was my fault. And this can create long-lasting shame and guilt. Shame says, I'm defective. Something's wrong with me. Guilt, usually false guilt. I'm taking on things that are not really appropriate for me to take on. Number two, self-blame, and you have this inner critic. It leads to that, abandonment leads to that harsh inner voice. And it points out, that inner critic points out everything possible that you may have possibly done wrong, even though you haven't. And sometimes we do this as a protection against future abandonment or future rejection. Number three, we will have insecurity in relationships. Abandonment leads to attachment issues, and it's hard to bond and connect with people. And we may overly rely on others just for a sense of value or self-worth. And number four, self-abandonment. Those with a painful abandonment issue, trauma in their life, you can do this, what we call self-abandonment. And you have these wounds, and then you deprioritize your needs. You kind of become codependent. You put everybody's other needs above you and your needs, and you've abandoned your own needs. All right. There's a few steps we just need to look at. There's a lot more information here in the article, but as you look at, we've got to acknowledge this, the pain, not deny it. This is real, and the pain is painful. Abandonment. You feel isolated, you feel alone, you feel really, truly, you're on that island alone. And it ultimately is very miserable. There's something called, number two, self-compassion, where we need to walk through in a compassionate way, not a critical way, with heavy judgment, just self-compassion for what happened to us, the pain of the abandonment. See, sometimes we have that harsh inner critic, and we have just beaten ourselves up. All right, number three, there is a time where we need to seek intervention, professional help, a program like at the Center, a Place of Hope, where it's intensive and you have a team working for you. Abandonment trauma, and it is trauma, will always leak over in different ways. Of course, relationships, sometimes addiction. It's something that Well, I think of it in terms of a ticking time bomb. Eventually, something breaks and it puts us in a crisis. And that's what we want to do our best to avoid, a pattern of life crisis because of abandonment. And I want to say there's hope, because I see people's lives change, and I see their lives change for good.